यदेश आकाश आनंदो न स्यात् येष ह्येवानन्दयाति यदा ह्येवैष एतस्मिन् अदृश्येनात्म्ये निरुक्ते निलयने भयं प्रतिष्ठां विन्दते अथ सो भयं गतो भवति यदा ह्येवैष एतस्मिन्नुदरमन्तरं कुरुते अथ तस्य भयं भवति तत्त्वेव भयं विदुषो मन्वानस्य तदप्येष श्लोको भवति। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। It appears that in life we have numerous different problems, and this variety of problems really bewilders us, makes us quite confused as to where to begin, how to go about bringing order in life. We feel we are utterly short of necessary resources, time or energy or cooperation of people, and so on and so forth. Very often you and I become so desperate and helpless, or at the edge of utter frustration. However, if we examine all these problems of life, and if we go a bit deeper into the nature of all these problems, we find that they spring forth, they arise out of some fundamental faulty position. That is where true spiritual wisdom throws its light. In our body, there are countless organs, limbs, systems, and billions of cells, and yet day after day the body functions, and we have a sense of oneness with respect to this whole body. But with respect to this creation, all humanity, all forms of life, and facets of nature, we don't have an inkling that all this also could be just one. We don't suspect that division or duality could be a creation of our own thinking. Spirituality, especially the science of the Vedanta, exposes this fundamental error. The Vedic portion I just now chanted from the Taittiriya Upanishad declares, even when our thinking creates a bit of division. Ut aram antaram kurute atatasya bhayam bhavati. There will be fear. And when our vision leaves no room for a division, then one has abhayam pratishtham vindate, utter fearlessness. Slightest sense of division leads to fear, and absence of division leads to natural fearlessness. And tonight we shall touch on coming upon true compassion and true forgiveness through the elimination of false duality. What we spoke last night too, for that matter, peace and freedom are absolutely rooted in the vision of oneness. When there is the observation, when there is the bright awareness in which we find that certain patterns of thought make us miss the peace which is waiting to be discovered, certain patterns of thought within us make us feel bound, though objectively, scientifically, we are totally free. That seeing leads to elimination of those patterns of thought. This was the summary of last night's talk. Carrying on from there itself, we shall examine this issue of forgiveness and compassion. And as an advanced summary, let me say that forgiveness and compassion in their true form, in their genuine nature, are natural to us when there is the appreciation, when there is the intuitive grasp that, hey, there is nobody other. They are in me, I am in them. All of us are one. The one about whom I think, oh, he did this to me, I will not forgive him for this, actually is not out there separately. Here I am not able to forgive or not even willing to forgive, and there he is or she is who doesn't deserve to be forgiven, or perhaps deserve to be, but I am not able to bring myself to forgive him or her. The simple fact that you and I continuously miss or fail to see is these two figures, the one who is to forgive and the second who is to be forgiven, are creations of the mind. The real person out there, I do not know. And the real person in here, I do not know. That's why we call all this self-knowledge. And that's why we say all our suffering in life is because of self-ignorance. Let's not make it into mere words or concepts. Rather, let's examine this and see the factual nature of these revelations of the Upanishads or so many mystics, so many great seers. So tonight the advanced summary is elimination of false duality brought about by thoughts leads to the natural rush of forgiveness as well as compassion. And unless this duality is gone, all talk as well as activities, much orchestrated, highly, let's say, dramatized activities even of forgiving and showing compassion and serving and charity and help and succor and whatever you may call, all that, unless the basic sense of duality goes away, is shallow, is incomplete, is something where apparently much is done, but really new problems are created. For 1 pound of doing something, you meanwhile have created 10 pounds of new problems. Many years ago, Pujya Swami Chinmayanandaji gave a topic for essay writing for youngsters in USA. I'm not sure if that essay contest finally took place or not, but the topic he gave was very thought-provoking. I was in Bombay and I learned, oh, this is the topic Swamiji has given to people in USA, Yuva Kendra, members of youth wing of the Chinmaya Mission everywhere. And that was, the rich do not bring down their walls, but they are very eager to do charity across the wall. That was the topic he gave. And that provokes thinking in us, and rather than judging that rich man there or this rich country here, rather than saying that is how the village chief did in my village, or that is how Europe or America or any particular club or society has been behaving, we need to see this tendency or this behavior in ourselves. Does every one of us do like that? We build a wall and ensure that we are at a certain advantageous position, and then safeguarding that position and also patting ourselves and consoling ourselves that this whole position has been acquired through dharmic means, mind you, in very righteous ways. And having all people who agree with that near us and keeping all people who disagree on that far away, and arranging for ourselves adequate psychological comfort, we say, now let us do some service across the wall, or maybe opening some windows in the wall which are shut at the right time. But charity is doled out, and we have outlets everywhere around the world, let us say, and that's what I call the much orchestrated way of charity. We could do this, like my words sort of implied, in an international scenario, but why? Why go for such big scenarios? We could do this in the relationship between two people. And we too, some X and I, need not be famous people, need not be heads of states or CEOs of companies, or we need not be powerful or rich or all those glitter and glamour, all those media attention and being in limelight, etc., is utterly insignificant in learning the art of living. This person and I, in whom we see this psychological behavior, and in whom this psychological behavior could come to an end, releasing true love and true compassion, true forgiveness, true acceptance of each other. These two people, someone and I, could be unknown to rest of the world too. So known and unknown, etc., are not important. But understanding this psychological behavior is important here. This is a particular psychological behavior, one last time, that applies to individuals or even huge communities and countries, where essentially there is the building and safeguarding of a personal image, and like the other side of the same coin, building and reinforcing an image of the other. And in this medium of images of who I am or who we are and who the other one is and others are, in this medium of mental constructions, there is all talk of being good or being bad, being kind or being cruel, and improvement, self-development, expanding, growing, becoming large-hearted. All judgments come about, but the basic medium, the basic frame of reference is not disturbed. But true mystics, the true seers, question that first position. In Mundakopanishad, there is the age-old question. In the Vedantic tradition, every student learns this mantra, if not in Sanskrit, in a translation, and enjoys its beauty and feels good about the Vedanta system, but doesn't really get at the truth revealed there. And what's that mantra? The Mundaka has this famous mantra. A very, very evolved student asks an enlightened teacher, "What is that, sir, upon knowing which all becomes known?" Kasminnu bhagavo vijnate sarvamidam vijnatam bhavati. Shaunaka asks Angirasa, and Angirasa is excited. This is the kind of question I would like to hear. And then rest of it is the dialogue of the Mundakopanishad. No wonder they call Vedanta Bhedanta. Bheda means division. Bheda is duality. And Vedanta is ending of Bheda. Bhedasya antaha Vedantaha. And the basic word too, Vedasya antaha Vedantaha, is also very significant. If you take Veda, which means knowledge, as the stored knowledge, the accumulated knowledge, where you picture yourself as somebody, if that can come to an end, you are free from all accumulation of both pleasant and unpleasant nature. You are free from all that is stored up, and being free from the stored up stuff, you are absolutely in the present, in all freshness. Because the stored up stuff, all said and done, is old. You may have the wonderful freezer, wonderful, or it could be memory storage as you have in machines, but nothing like fresh fresh food or the fresh sunrise. The sunrise now in front of your eyes. Nothing like your child smiling at you now. Your child smiling at you now may not compare well with the videotape of how she smiled a month ago. But what would you prefer? The videotape or the child that is alive? The videotape, of course, by certain specifications, is much more grand. The child not only smiled, it danced and made so many gestures, beat her father and mother in all respects, in stunts and whatever, and you say, oh, that videotape is so wonderful. But if I ask you, I give you a choice now, keep the videotape and give the child to me, or keep the child with you and I take the videotape. Will you ever choose the videotape? My child, leave alone smiling. Even if the child is weeping, I would want my child. Child is life. My child is me. In the same way, the present moment and what you and I are at the present moment is of immense importance. But we remain in images, in memories, and through that we deny the present. When we are caught in memories, when we are caught in images, and therefore in the past, in the old, the whole question of forgiving rises. If we are not caught in the old, does the question of forgiveness rise at all? So we need to see that this whole issue of forgiving and being compassionate has risen because we, the humanity, are typically in the clutches of the past. And the past, in the light of all these talks here, is not so much information, not so much details of events, as it is a matter of a judgment that we carry of who we are, and a judgment that we carry, sustain about who others are. As we are talking here, a lady walks in, let us say, and I know that she had contested a certain election. I know she is from Southern California, and in the city of Anaheim she contested for a certain official post and lost by a large margin. Suppose I know it. And as she comes in, I look at her only in the light of that. Rest of it goes away. I look at her as the person who lost the election. And I become extra conscious. If I am giving any example from politics today, I better be careful. There is this candidate, she may take personally. Suppose in various ways, or I may go an extra length to gratify her ego, and so on and so forth. We do this all through life. Many a time, this is utterly irrelevant. And that person may feel very embarrassed. That person many a time has put it all behind, has died, so to say, to that past of hers. Many a time. Some other time may not be. But I cling to an image. Don't we all go through sometimes an embarrassing situation where we console somebody for like a loss, a defeat in election, and that person says, oh, I had forgotten, you reminded me today. Then that person needs to console us, not for a sorrow of defeat, but the embarrassment of, oh, I handled the whole thing in an inappropriate manner, so we are agitated and our image is disturbed. You and I get disturbed. If our own mind says, that was not the way you had to speak, and so on. I've heard from one of my grandfather or some grandfatherly figures, I don't remember who exactly said it. He narrated to me some incident in the 1940s or so where the viceroy happened to come to our small town, and our village headmaster, who knew a little English in the town, was there. And instead of saying good morning or some such word, by mistake he said good evening. It was morning. And the viceroy smiled and walked away. He didn't expect anything. He didn't have any. His mind must have been busy with some other issues. And this visit to this town must have been a time management problem and somehow passed through that town and so on. But somebody who narrated this to me said, I believe that headmaster who in front of all said wrongly good evening instead of good morning was so agitated for days on end. Instead of saying good morning, I said good evening. And actually, neither mattered to the viceroy, nor mattered to anybody else, because all of them were excited in their own ways. Nobody was interested in whether the headmaster said the right thing or wrong thing. Now, we are the headmasters. Every one of us has this. Oh, I must share with you one more joke of Swami Tejomayananji, wonderful one. A mother is waking up a child. Come on, her son, I should say. The mother is waking up her son. Get up, go to school. The son says, no, I want to sleep a little more. The mother says, look, please, it is getting late, go. The son says, why should I go? No students like me. Mother says, no, you should go. No teachers at the school like me. And mother says, even then, please go. I don't want to go. Why should I go? Nobody, the attendant, the peon, even visitors, nobody at the school likes me. Why should I go? Finally, the mother says, you must go because you are the headmaster of the school. So it's not a small child. This is the headmaster's problem. In the same way, you and I are the headmasters. You and I are the center of the problem. So self-inquiry is about understanding how we are trapped, we are caught in images. And the basic problem, therefore, is to be free from images, from the psychological grip. And as we have labored to show all these days, among memories there is a subset. The subset of memories causes a certain estimation, evaluation of ourselves. And generally we take it for its face value. We don't question. If my mind, drawing a small figment of memories, says to me, after all this you are a failure, I take it for its face value and I feel heavy in my chest. And on another occasion, if my mind, again mind you, drawing a small figment of memories. Memories actually are a very huge, almost infinite storehouse of things that happen. But a small figment is taken and my mind says, you are really a wonderful person. I feel good about it. Now in the context of this forgiveness, compassion, or yesterday's peace, freedom, and all these, we must see the role that the self-judgment plays. In other words, the question of my forgiving him is a big question, a valid question, a real question, when not just what he did to me is involved, but my carrying the hurt is involved. The issue of I want to forgive him rises, and it has great strength only when I am carrying the hurt. See how the I comes into picture. Yesterday one of you said to me very nicely a rewording of what I had tried to explain, in a rewording in a better way. Some lady went to this doctor and said, my whole body is aching and I am sure all my bones are broken. And the doctor said, what makes you say so? And the lady says, see, I touch here, it pains. I touch here, it pains. I touch at the, my foot, it pains. I touch my nose, it pains. So last week's accident has broken all my bones. And the doctor examines her and says, oh, no, the problem is your finger has a broken bone. So wherever you touch, it pains. Thank you for giving me that example. The gentleman is sitting here who gave me that example, but it is helpful for all of us to appreciate how, yes, in our psychological suffering, there is this, like the finger, there is this I, and it is a repetitive phenomenon. The thoughts coming in quick succession and building this image, then the second time come up in succession and build the image. Like in a television screen, there is, in one of the technologies, there are now many technologies, an electron beam goes on scanning the screen, some 550 or 650 lines in one frame, illumining different points, making some blue, some red, some gray, some white, some yellow. And so many picture elements are all illumined in a certain pattern, and you see a horse and somebody riding on the horse. And within a fraction of a second, the electron beam is again hitting the whole screen in a scanning sequence. And once more that picture is built, a third time, a fourth time. And for movement, maybe the 10th picture is slightly different from the first one. The 20th is again a little different. So you have the sense of movement of the horse, the man riding. And if the whole thing were to be slowed down, imagine. You have a control on your television, a TV with a speed control of scanning and all those things. You are playing a videotape, let's say, but you can slow down the speed. Then first the whole thing slows down, and then you find there's a still picture, man on the horse. Suppose you engineer it like that. It's possible, not a big deal for you technicians. Then go slower. Then there will be no horse. There is no rider. There are only lines coming slowly, one after another. By the time a second line comes, first line is fading away. If you slow it down tremendously, at a time you will have only one line. Further, at a time you will have only one dot. You say, oh, that point is going yellow. This point is coming blue. This point is coming gray. So it's all gray and yellow and blue dots. But when they come in quick succession at a certain speed and frame repetition rate and all those things, there is the optical illusion of the man on horse riding away and even shooting. He is shooting. And we shake in our chair. Some of us may go back also. I hope a bullet doesn't hit us. There could be such tremendous make-believe aspect of modern technology. Slow it down. Now, in the same way, If you could slow your mind, you will find the truth of this great spiritual science. There is the creation by the mind, the electron beam here being memory at work. Memory paints again and again what he said, how he reacted, and then what he did, how I pleaded with him, don't do this. And then the last blow, the last straw on the camel's back was when he physically pushed me. I fell on ground. And quick repetition of it. So his memory at work. I, who relive now that insult and injury, his memory at work. It is all software. It is all thoughts. You can have an appreciation of what meditation could be at this point. In meditation, you see the mind at play, and you know that the mind is playing, and that insight frees you from taking this whole thing for real. When you don't take this whole thing for real, the one who hurt and I who got hurt are all just figments of memory now. The truth is awareness alone, the seer alone. So in this insight into the way our mind works, the walls collapse, the walls break down. But in real life, we say, you cannot slow down the mind like that. All this is so wonderful to listen to, but actually the mind is at high speed, it's building pictures. And so much wound we carry, so much hurt we carry. And many times it gets stronger, it gets more hurting. Some mornings I get up and these memories pain me more than ever before. What am I to do? And so on. So we ask so-called practical questions. Be clear about the fundamentals, be clear about the basic truths, and stay aware. Examine. You find this examining is the way for more and more clear seeing. Seeing is the way to seeing, in other words. I just use synonyms. If you examine, you will see. Examine and see are synonyms here. Seeing is the way to see. Loving is the way to love. Understanding is the way to understanding. Make various combinations, you get good literature. But the truth is just seeing. Therefore, very many wise people are not interested in giving lectures or writing books too. You know why? You have many examples in the East and in the West who declined to write books or give lectures, and many others did. Now this camp, who did not show interest, saw that truth is a matter of seeing, and verbalization to a great extent is entertainment, and to a little extent it might set people on the right direction. Many felt that talking about truth, talking about God does more injustice than justice, because people are likely to grab a concept, an image, a symbol, and then on spiritual symbols we raise a new wall. My book and your book, my mantra and your mantra, my method and your method, and so on. So rather than getting into a genuine practice of whatever method there is, we get quite agitated. Our first priority many times becomes having other members of the family also follow my method. Then together we will go deep. First let us have uniformity and so on. There is much fight over symbols too in this world of ours. So it is a long debate. I, for one, do not have a ready answer whether religion has divided people or brought people together. We find both are happening. This religion is such a powerful force. Spirituality is such a powerful thing that millions and millions shed tears, become emotional, form new unions, form new, associations, and are set for their own uplift and liberation of the world and whatnot. Many a time it becomes a snowball effect. Hundreds join, 500 join, thousands join, and then you and I join not because we understood anything, but we like that whole movement. All are joining. I have never seen such thing. I am in for it, and so on. But what is it about? It is the thing now. This new thing, this new yoga, and I am also joining. Amazing, That person talks and everybody is after him, and I have never seen such a thing before, and I am also joining. Then you are enjoying the joining. You don't know what it is about. And you may even say, I am going to give my life for this, because this is such a wonderful thing. But you don't know the content. From that angle of view, one definitely wonders what is all religion about. But on the other side, yes, a few who go and examine the actual teachings of some great master find they are so true. So this is a long debate, the good and bad sides of organized religion or mass following faith and all that. Let me not go into it. Coming back, true spirituality, of course, flowers in the individual's heart, in the heart of you and me. I would dare say that thinking about these other topics is a waste of time. Let us live our life where we are, our job, our family, our relationships, our conflicts. Every one of us has enough of it. Like other day we had in a question answer setting, I think, we had quoted Swami Chinmayananji, who humorously said, problems in life are supplied free of cost. That part you need not worry. There are no charges for question paper. Question paper is supplied free of cost. But your job is to try to solve the problems. So every one of us has, including the speaker, intriguing conflicts, peculiar dilemmas. Day after day we are trying to handle it. And in the light of tonight's theme, in this handling my conflict, typically what I do is I operate through the self-judgment. I am so and so, and not one sentence. In a split second, it is as though 1,000 sentences about who I am rise, and the picture of mine, self-image, is built in a split second. And standing on the platform of this self-image, I am trying to solve the problems. But we say, this self-image is the problem. This self-image is this finger is the problem, right? It is touching everywhere. And if you say, no, now I'll go systematically, rather than going random, I will start from the feet and make recordings. Feet, ankle, knee joint, thighs, and up to the head I will go and make recordings of the pain. But you are not doubting that this finger has a broken bone. In the same way, we do not doubt that we could be, our own psychological structure about who we are could be the central issue. In one of the lines of his Saddarshanam, Sri Ramana Maharshi says, the most wonderful way of being is being without the self. Self in small letters, S-E-L-F. That is this self-image. He used a sweet Sanskrit expression, Niraham Pratiti. Aham Pratiti, Aham is I. Aham Pratiti is an idea of myself. Nir is a negational prefix in Sanskrit. Niraham Pratiti. Am I living in hurt? You don't know. You don't think about it. Imagine you are going for a morning walk and I bump onto you and ask, hey, how are you this morning? You still carry this hurt? Other day you were very hurt. And you look at me, what hurt? Oh, we don't know. You don't even remember. Oh, that's fine, keep it up. So I go my way, you go your way. And all you see is there are some wonderful butterflies that morning. They were always there, you didn't see because you were immersed in your thoughts. Imagine one morning you see all the butterflies, the dewdrops on the leaves. It will be heaven on earth if you have an empty mind like that. Hardly anyone has this empty mind. The empty mind doesn't have to plan to forgive, doesn't have to plan to be compassionate. Empty in what sense? Empty of the I. Aham Pratiti. Ramana has a wonderful insight there. He says, why do you waste time on long discussions on reality and falsehood, consciousness and inert, insentient entities, on nature of happiness and causes of sorrow, all philosophizing. All this is a wasteful talk. Stay in quiet attention and let thoughts behave themselves. You are not disciplining them, you are aware. You stay in attention. In that state of attention, thoughts behave themselves. Stay in attention, free of the thought-created ego or self, where the world of joy and sorrow, the world of birth and death, world of success and failure doesn't exist. This is actually what everyone desires, but no one is going for it. Everyone is sidetracked. So one is trapped in something else. All this is said in a single Sanskrit verse. Satyam mrishava chididam jadam va dukkham sukham va iti mudha vivadah adrishta loka niraham pratitihi nishta avikalpa parama akhileshta. Very insightful. That state, by the way, state is not something that is processed and arrived at in time. The state is, the word state I am using in the sense of a way of being. So otherwise we have the state where it's the product of a process. For example, I take a certain amount of ice, and put it in a bowl and heat it. I am a physics teacher and I say, look boys and girls, here is some ice. So H2O is in now solid state. Now as I heat it, it comes to liquid state. Now I heat it more, it goes to gaseous state. No, these are, you heat and for a certain pressure and temperature setting, the matter occupies a state. Be careful. I am not talking of a state where we heat ourselves or cool ourselves or motivate ourselves and stay there holding on something. No. Here we say a way of being. In fact, a way also could be misleading. It is pure being. Be. It is the mind which goes to different states. But be aware, and awareness is not a state that is the result of some process. Awareness is your nature. You and I are. I am and I am aware. Is a truth which everyone, I am sure, would accept. I am aware. As a child you are, and as an old man also you are. It is so natural. Like in a related example, I could say, as a child you take a bit of sugar in your mouth, you feel it is sweet. As an old man also, you take some sugar in your mouth, it feels sweet, it tastes sweet. This is so natural to you. But as a child, you take a book which is some technical stuff. You may not take head or tail of it. Those are acquired things. But as an adult, let's say you are a mathematician and you take a sheet of paper where Pythagoras theorem or some complex vector algebra is explained and you understand it. These are acquired and then you may forget also. There are things which are acquired and let go of. But we are talking of not even the tongue's taste. See, you may lose taste. When we have fever, etc., we say, no taste. But awareness just cannot go. It's contradiction in terms for anyone to say, from early morning, now, today I have not been aware at all. I notice that I am not aware. This is a contradiction in terms. It is like, as we have the famous example in Indian logic system, Vadato Vyaghataha, it is said. Someone goes up the stage and says, ladies and gentlemen, I want to let you know I am dumb. Please make a note of it. I just cannot speak. From childhood I am dumb. All of you listen. Huh? Vadato Vyaghataha. Even as he opens his mouth, there is contradiction there. In the same way, for anyone to say, I am not aware, Swamiji, I disagree with whatever you say. I have decided this evening I have come with a sankalpa to disagree with you. Yeah. So I say, are you not aware? I am not at all aware. I don't see anything at all. Do you hear me? I don't hear you. Then we say, Namaste, Namaste, hum nahi samajhte. You give up that. That is not sensible. So please see, is there a certain truth about this? Are you not aware? And can you be that awareness and not descend into the cell of thoughts and watch things from that medium of thoughts? Watch that cell also. Watch that prison. Watch that. Prison is a bad word. Some of you may say, no, nowadays my sense of self is so wonderful. God has been kind to me. Even in and through all the depression, Swamiji, I have been fortunate. Financially and family-wise and everywhere. And you too have been kind to me these days, surprisingly, and whatever. Then I wouldn't call it prison. Then your self-image at this present time is a palace. So you are in the palace of self-image. But more often, a whole lot of us are in the prison of self-image. For there is always something to be desired, a certain incompleteness, some form or the other. Can we be aware of this prison? Mind has created this. Quietly aware, without a comment. Silence is not the dull silence, but alert silence, watchful silence, vigilant silence is the ultimate sadhana. spiritual practice, if at all we could call it practice. I personally do not say it is a practice, but in a lay language or simpler, loose language, let us call it. Alert silence is the highest spiritual practice. But we are so fond of reacting, responding, saying something, asked or not asked. Some 12 years ago I read this book, Silence as Yoga. And I was so intellectually restless those days. I liked it so much. I gave so many talks on that book, Silence as Yoga. Day and night I talked about Silence as Yoga. This is such a wonderful book, and all problems are solved through silence, See, read this. And if not as yoga, many people wanted me to be silent for their peace of mind. This fellow is after us and so on. I mean, almost literally. I was teaching at Bombay, and one day I went, towards the end of the talk, 1 hour class, the 50th minute or so, it came to my mind. By the way, my dear students, I read this book on silence. Well, wonderful book, I should tell you. That day I talked some 20 minutes more, and people were hungry. It was breakfast time, and we have a system there. We have a lecture hall, and then next to it, after 10 feet gap, is the dining hall. And there is a bell there. And there is a kitchen servant who stands next to the bell, and it is the custom and respect for the spiritual teacher who is conducting the class. Unless the class is over, he won't ring the bell. He is waiting. What is he talking? I'm aware also, but there was so much of intellectual restlessness is like that. I was explaining, and Swami Paramananda says again in the 30th page, in this page, and he has mentioned this, on and on and on. Half the class is hungry and waiting to eat, and this man is waiting, looking at me. Finally, I said, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And that day he rang it so loudly, I tell you. Tan, 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 tan. Celebration. Because that's necessary for rest of the ashramites. There are some 100 people living in the 7-acre campus. All of them then come. So, now, apart from the humor, you and I should notice this, that we are caught in thought patterns. Are we using thoughts, or are thoughts driving us? Suppose a thought rises, does it become a compulsion? Suppose I remember a joke now, a very good joke, whether it is relevant to the subject or not. Let me say, because I don't know, another 5 minutes, what else to say? Then it's a pitiable situation. Whereas if one is very aware, leave the speaker's role in relationships. You are relating to spouse and children, neighbors and employers, colleagues and employees. Life is constantly coming into various relationships. In all these relationships, a heightened awareness makes thoughts subservient. In lack of awareness, thoughts get an upper hand over you. You could be very agitated. And you could go berserk also. So this I thought, aham vritti, the self-image, is the crux of the whole problem. Now I will briefly touch on the oneness that comes about in the elimination of the self-image. You can never plan to eliminate your ego. By living alertly, by being observant, by noticing the way the ego, the self, operates with no agenda, with no fragmented or compartmentalized, particularized plan. Like, today I shall reduce my anger. Monday I will reduce my anger. Tuesday my special attention will be to handle waves of jealousy. Wednesday, this is compartmentalizing, very silly. And Thursday is off because I will be tired by this. Thursday I will take off. So you and I tend to think like that because, by the way, it is very valid in a lot of other operations. Suppose I need to study some 6 subjects: English and mathematics, social studies and science. What else? Mathematics, some other 6 subjects. And to say, every evening I get about 2 hours. Monday I shall study mathematics, Tuesday social studies, Wednesday science, Thursday English. Perfect. There it's not silly. Because it's information, it is various skills. But here, in as much as this jealousy and this anger, this revengefulness, this inability to come to terms with some situation, they are all extremely interrelated, and we don't know the pattern in which they emerge. Tuesday I am set to handle jealousy, but that day I have a lot of happiness. I am so happy. I want to handle jealousy, but it's not coming up that day. It can happen like that. Because it is extremely complex. The ways of the self are a million times more complex than even the computers and supercomputers and all that. The best is not to have an agenda and be aware. So in the staying aware, alert, not to think about, will I be able to stay alert? This is terrible. He has given us the highest homework now, and so on. Then doesn't matter, even a minute here, a minute there. No one needs to strain oneself in the name of this awareness. A minute here, a minute there, 2 minutes, especially when there is some fear, just say, okay, before I decide what to do about this, let me notice what is happening to me for just 2 minutes. Then there are pressures. You have to decide. You have to decide. You didn't expect any visitor at a certain time, and there is a loud bang on the door. There is a fear. Who is this? And there is a calling bell, and this man or woman is banging. There is a fear. And he is banging or she is banging. Now you could give to yourself a few seconds even watching the self in operation. And then of course you have to take a decision, go and see through the eye hole or all those things. But in watching, in moments of fear, in moments of hurt, in moments of sorrow, things happen on their own. So if self-image disappears, then the person whom I need to forgive is no more a psychological construction in me. The actual person may be in front of me, or he may be away in Cincinnati, but he is no more a figure putting its pressure on my mind. The rubber surface of my mind does not have these heavy weights of someone to be forgiven, causing a curvature there. I myself have, as we have, in physics, Einsteinian physics, they think of a thin rubber surface, elastic surface, and the sun, this star, is like a heavy weight. It creates a curvature, and all the planets are like heavy weights. And the most intricate issue of gravity he explained with this analogy. Now coming back to this theme from physics and gravity, the psychological plane is like a rubber surface, an elastic plane, XY, two-dimensional surface in this analogy. And my self-image is like one weight, a mass, and an image of that person in Cincinnati, and this other person in Orlando, to whom I am very attached. The man in Cincinnati I cannot forgive, and the man in Orlando, oh, how I wish he and I were together, etc. This is another weight, and all this create a dip. Now suppose images disappear. That is when you have, on one hand, a very objective picture of things. On the other, in as much as self-image and other images have gone to thin air, you will not perceive a division at all. You will not make an issue of, he made that mistake, I did not. He said it, I did not. Mind you, he asked for it, I, he, she. When there is no pressure of this he and she, and when there is no pressure of who did that. Sometimes in some moral issues, you are wondering about whether something is right or wrong. And then you ask, before I give my judgment, tell me who did it? And the other person says, I won't tell you. You tell me whether this is right. Well, it depends. You and I live like that. Very clever people. So if someone whom I like does it, it must be good, for good reasons. For someone whom I don't like does it, that proves how wicked he is, and so on. Likes and dislikes, again a memory phenomenon. So images go, likes and dislikes go. In that, unbelievably, the wonder of wonders is the very division of you and me goes away. And then, if my own teeth bite my tongue, there is pain. My teeth bit my tongue, and there is a lot of pain. But I would not smash my teeth. I would not punish. There is a different quality to the whole handling. Though there is no denying that this should not happen again and all that. In the same way, when there is no division of you, me, there is true love, the whole humanity is appreciated as one because of the elimination of the self-image. Not because some book said it and we repeated that sentence 10 times. We are one, all humanity is one, and we went with placards on the streets. That has limited value, and it has some value. If you are all doing, I would also join you, and I will also try some dance and hold the placard. Why not? Sometimes it gives some relief. Sometimes a peace march through the streets of San Jose can bring some peace. But true peace, true freedom, true love, true forgiveness, and true compassion is never possible by that outside-in approach, because human mind is caught in certain judgments, certain rigidities. The loosening up of those rigidities and the letting go of thoughts of hatred and ultimately letting go of thoughts of division is what is required. And that is where awareness, not as a concept but as an actuality, does the job. The summary of tonight's theme discussion is, while hundreds of psychological and other methods could be there to bring in us the healthy values of forgiveness and compassion, to go to the crux of the issue, we need to see that our mind, which repeats certain patterns of thinking, builds images of people with whom we have either anger or revenge, and rebuilds images of us who are at the receiving end when those people hurt us, did injustice to us. This image building of those who did injustice to us and we who suffered sustains a situation where true forgiveness can never take place. And in attention, in awareness, in seeing the entirety of these thought structures, there comes about a subsiding of the images. While functional memory remains, the subjective memory, I, me, I was hurt, and those things go away. There comes about an objective evaluation of things in which, rooted in a sense of oneness, promoting sympathy, etc., there will be true forgiveness, true compassion as a natural flow. Quite a long sentence, excuse me. So, all this is one topic really, no divisions.